propose significant reforms, the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria gathers for its highly anticipated July meeting this week. Thank you for joining us for CNBC Africa's special coverage of the MPC decision. I am Wole Famurewa. Against the backdrop of key macroeconomic changes, the MPC is poised to set a new tone for the country's monetary policy direction in the coming months. Since the last meeting in May, the country's economic agenda, spearheaded by the government led by President Bola Tinubu, has driven various transformative measures. These include the abolition of multiple forex windows and the adoption of a market-determined forex rate. As we await the MPC's decision, our esteemed guests are here to provide their insights and preview the outcome. Joining us on this panel are Bismarck, Rewane, the CEO of Financial Derivatives. We also have joining us virtually Femi Oladehin, partner at Argentil Capital Partners, and Egie Akpata, chairman of Skymark Partners. Let me start with you, Bismarck. Thank you again for joining us. So much anticipated for several reasons. Of course, the big development before this meeting, obviously, is, as I mentioned, the abolition of multiple exchange rates and moving closer to a market-determined rate. Maybe I should begin by getting your perspective on what you think will be the key considerations of the meeting right now.
I think there's a determination to desegment the market and reduce the multiple windows, not to eliminate them. They've not been eliminated. There are still multiple windows, but the gap between one and the other is actually much lower. So I think the intentions here is to actually reduce the amount of subsidies in the system. One being in the exchange rate, two being in the petroleum PMS subsidy, and three being in the cost-reflective tariffs on electricity. Now, there's also another huge subsidy in the effective interest rates. So what one will expect to see, is to bridge that gap between inflation and interest rates, not at one fell swoop, but at least moving in directionally, so that effective interest rates, which is the most important thing, are not kept artificially low. If that is done, and that is followed by money supply contraction, then we are likely to see some form of equilibrium across various segments, i.e. the interest rates, the exchange rate, and petroleum prices.
Let me bring Femi into the conversation now. Femi, thank you again for joining us. I think another perhaps very important message that must come out of this meeting is trying to restore, if you like, investor confidence. And I imagine that will not happen overnight. But in your opinion, what could be the key signals that could come out of this meeting that could move us in that direction?
Thanks, Wole. Hi, Bismarck and Egie. So this is something that I've always said, that when it comes to economics, what you say is probably even as important as what you do. Markets react to information or direction from central bankers, from ministers of petroleum, ministers of finance, specifically depending on what drives that economy. For us in Nigeria, look, we seem to be doing the right thing. In terms of, as Bismarck alluded to, removing the artificial subsidies that the market or the economy has had to deal with in recent times. But I think what has been missing has been the messaging. There hasn't been any clear, coherent message from the new government to even give us an indication of exactly how they think, what their key policy drivers are going to be, and what direction they expect the market to go. So
could that be a reflection of the overwhelming challenge that many had already predicted for this government going in?
Well, look, the truth is that the challenge isn't something that is surprising, but the sound bites are very, very important because you know that the economy is run on both monetary fiscal policy, but a lot of what happens in economies is based on perception of the market. If the market perceives that there is competence, if the market perceives that there is a coherent message as to the direction of the government, the market will react accordingly. And I think that's where the biggest challenge that we've had is. We have a central bank acting governor that no one has heard from effectively from the day he resumed. And probably this is the first time the market is likely going to interact with him. That isn't right. The first thing that should have happened is that that individual should have come out to the market and calmed the market and given everyone confidence that, look, we're on top of this. There's a lot of dislocation in the market, yes, but we have a long-term plan. This is how monetary policy is going to react to it. These are the rules that the central bank is going to intervene with. And I think it's that confidence that the market wants to see. Yes, there are hard times ahead. We all understand that. Nigerians have started to feel it in their pockets. But if there's clarity as to where the future is going, or what direction the future is, then you'll start to see people react to it. Right now, I don't believe any corporates are making long-term investment plans because we simply don't know where the direction of the economy is,
Well, thank you for that. Let me go to Egie now. And Egie, obviously, it's very interesting that the scheduling of this meeting is unlike what we've seen in the past. We're now seeing it hold in the evening, usually somewhere around 2 p.m. And some will suggest that potentially that could signal a surprise. Perhaps the MPC is thinking, let's do this after the markets have closed, and so everyone has some hours to digest the information. But do you anticipate any huge moves out of this meeting?
Yeah, good evening, Wole. Good evening, Bismarck and Femi. I don't anticipate anything material coming out of this meeting. I think anything they wanted to do was done at the last meeting. And in reality, the variables that the central bank has control over, which are largely interest rates and CRR, have more or less been maxed out. I mean, it makes no difference if NPR moves today. It doesn't make any difference. I mean, NPR went up 50 basis points last time, and interest rates for all metrics, deposits, bonds, and T-bills are down. So clearly that's not what matters. I think Femi's point is very valid. You don't have a substantive finance minister, and you certainly don't have a substantive CBN governor. So everything is kind of rudderless. And what has been happening is a drip feed of different policies, just one-off. So there's something on CRR now. Something came out on loan-to-deposit ratios yesterday. There's stuff that's come out on FX. So it's not very coherent. But the reality is that right now it's about the details of the administrative measures central bank implements, which largely center around liquidity, both in terms of Naira liquidity in the system and how they're going to put dollar liquidity in the FX market. There needs to be clear communication from the central bank today on how those two things will be dealt with. If not, the spiral that we're seeing right now will continue.
Certainly very huge challenges, Bismarck, for the monetary authorities. And we are already seeing the signals of that. As you know, even the governors actually agreed not to allow too much money to get into the system by holding back some of their federal allocations. And now that we've seen that adjustment of the exchange rate, it seems like there is now an opportunity for a lot more Naira to come into the system. How big a challenge do you think this is for the central bank?
I think if you look at money supply growth, which has been 33% year on year, normally the average has been about 14, 15% a year. So it has doubled this year. An increase in money supply without actually a corresponding increase in output means that's inflation. You've stoked inflation already. So I do not understand when you say that governors agreed to withhold their money. I don't think anybody agreed on that. I think that was just a directive. And the whole secular flow of income philosophy is that money goes from people to the government and back to the people.
But that directive was with inflation in mind, I want to believe.
No, but there's inflation anyway. The cure to inflation includes so many things: increase productivity, increase interest rates, and allow the markets to determine prices. There's no short term, there's no silver bullet. The reality is that the lag between when you make policies and when you get the impact is there.
So do you think there should be a material hike in interest rates? Is that what we need, given the scenarios we see now?
No, definitely directionally. You can't have interest rates at 3, 4, 5% for treasury bills, and you have inflation at about 23, 24%. That gap is too wide. So the whole idea of mobilizing national savings, because savings is a function of interest rates, while consumption is a function of income, right? So incomes are down, and savings are also down. So the reality is that we must deal with it holistically and comprehensively. This siloed decision-making, what we call the politics of limited objectives, we have to come away from that. So I think that you will have an interest rate hike, but not significant, maybe 25 to 50 basis points at most.
Right.
That's what you're
Let me go back to Femi now. The cash reserve ratio, as you know, very controversial. But even I think Egie alluded to the fact that the authorities have probably maxed out on that as a lever to extract liquidity from the market. How do you think the central bank or the monetary authorities can begin to think about a major move that can extract liquidity from the system? I imagine that typically you would think a significant hike in interest rates, but then, as we know, the interest rate did move during the last meeting and we haven't seen the impact.
So Wole, I mean, one thing that's clear, I mean, and to us economists on this call and everyone who understands economics 101, is that there are basic principles for economics, right? If you have, money supply growth at almost 33%, as Bismarck said earlier on, the direct implication, especially in a low productivity economy, is that inflation is going to continue to worsen. Don't forget, we're literally coming from a government that borrowed over 24 trillion from central bank, effectively through ways and means financing, and that was just printed cash. There are a number of things that obviously this means for us as an economy. First, we're still running a negative interest rate environment, which means real interest rates are in the negative territories. So again, you're not likely to see significant inflows from investors that are looking for yield in that market, because the reality is that your money is simply worth less than it is the moment you buy any T-bill in the Nigerian market. By the time you're discounting it in 1 week, the money is worth less than it was before you got it. I still even have concerns about the way inflation numbers are being reported, because it's obvious that for people who are on the market, average inflation is simply higher than what the Federal Office of Statistics has been showing us. So intuitively, it is obvious that there are certain things that the central bank has control over. So we can't, and one of those is the CRR.
Right.
But the problem is that the CRR was not the problem in the first place. They were the problem. They created the problem by printing money without any handbrakes.